Okay. Welcome to the Podluck podcast. Thank you for joining us for the inaugural first pilot episode. We're so thankful that you're joining us for this unknown journey. It's the first episode, so you joined us really sight unseen. And so we wanted to take this opportunity in the first episode to share with everyone why we started this podcast, what it's going to be about, and kind of why we feel like it is something that a lot of Korean-American Adventists will want to hear. And so the Podluck podcast is a conversational podcast about the intersection of culture and faith for Korean-American Adventists. Simply what that means is, when we live our lives, we have like the cultural moments that happen in our lives, and inevitably it's going to intersect with our faith. And I'm sure you've experienced it, where there's these like cross sections and moments where culture and things that are happening in the world come into our faith. And we want to talk about these things, maybe talk about discussions that are happening in our churches around the country, or introduce new ideas or topics or discussions that may not be talked about yet. And so I am one of your co-hosts. My name is Jason Kim. I am the Associate Director at the Kainos Project based out in Southern California. And this here is my co-host.
Hi, my name is Chris Chong. I'm the lead pastor of Rock Fellowship in Portland, Oregon. Jason and I go way back. We've been friends for a long time. And so when he shared this opportunity with me, I thought it was a great idea. And so I'm excited to do this with you, man.
Yep, me too. I'm just gonna talk about the...
yeah, okay. So one of the first things that we wanted to... So this podcast is titled The Podluck, and I think... Good. Okay, sorry. I got this. The title of this podcast is The Podluck, and I think it's important that everyone understands... Should I be looking at the camera here?
For this part, and then... for this part, and then eventually, when you're not talking to the audience, you can look at me.
Okay. The title of this podcast is The Podluck. And obviously it sounds like the word potluck, and it's combined with the word, no, I don't like that. The title of this podcast is The Podluck, and I actually think it's important for all of us to understand why we called it that. And obviously the word is a combination of two words, it's potluck and podcast. And the reason why we called it that is because this is kind of an extension of the conversations that we have at potluck after church. And Jason, you know that the concept of the potluck is a very uniquely, immigrant but Korean Adventist thing that we all do at church. Mm-hmm. And it's this great opportunity for people to talk and hang out, and you talk about the sermon, you talk about your life, you talk about what's going on in the world. And so this podcast is like a little opportunity to continue that conversation that we're all having at our own respective churches, where we talk about these things that are going around in the world and in our lives.
Right, and for our first podcast episode, we wanted to do it, one, in person, but also we both happen to be at Berrien Springs at Andrews University.
Ooh.
Incidentally, this is where our friendship really deepened.
That's true.
Started. We'll talk about that at the end of the podcast. But we wanted to start in a fellowship hall. We are at the fellowship hall of the Andrews Korean Church, Living Springs Fellowship. And we thought it was really fitting to start the podcast in the place where these conversations happen. And like Chris said, we really felt like these conversations happen everywhere. And a lot of it is regionally influenced, right? Some people in the East Coast, the nature of the conversation is a little bit different than the West, North, South. But really, at the core, we're talking about the same issues, the same things. And just wanted a forum where we could talk about it. And this kind of started with a conversation with my wife about how a lot of people who go to church, they're not really able to join the worship service. So in our situation, we have 2 young kids. And so my wife would have to be in the class with them. And that was true for a lot of the parents. You had to be with them, 5, 3-year-old kids. And so you're in church, but you don't actually get to experience kind of the spiritual element of church. You get the community, which is awesome and it's great, but you miss that spiritual element. And I think she felt like her and some of the other parents kind of wanted something midweek that kind of addressed the spiritual need. And it's not a sermon. We could always go to YouTube and get our live stream and listen to that, but just something a little bit more easily digestible in the middle of the week. And I felt like that could have been expanded to just church members at large. We have a lot of people who are super involved in church, praise leaders, our deacons, elders, deaconesses, all that. If you need a little bit something midweek, this is, I think, the podcast. And there's a billion podcasts out there. We keep hearing like the podcast market is saturated, which is true. There's a lot, but there's no podcast for Korean-American Adventists. I think this is really the only one specifically for that general population.
Yeah, and I floated this idea by a few of my members and close friends. And I think what's interesting is that I got varied responses.
Sure.
So one of the people I talked to, they were saying, "This is a great idea. Like I'm gonna listen. I think it's gonna be awesome. I think that's super interesting. Like why not? Just go for it. Let's do it." And then another person I talked to about the different ideas and things that we might discuss, and he was saying, I feel like this is only valuable if there is a deep spiritual purpose behind it. Like because I could listen to all kinds of stuff about all kinds of interesting things. But if I'm going to listen to something for the Korean American Church, like it should be a spiritually based thing to like, to what you're talking about as far as like having a digestible spiritual, moment. And then I had another person say like, I'm probably not going to listen to this. Like I'll listen to it because you're doing it, but like, I'm not really that interested. And he said, actually, I might listen to it if it was like 2 minutes long. And I was like, dude, you're not going to listen to it then. And I was pretty offended by that, but.
As long as they just subscribe.
But that kind of speaks to how this podcast is going to work, because it's not going to be one thing all the time. It's kind of going to be a bunch of different things. Like so I think there are going to be times where it is going to be a little bit more spiritually grounded, more devotional, and it's going to help those people who couldn't really focus in on church. And maybe we'll even talk about sermons we preached. I don't know, give like little highlights. But there are other times we're going to talk about what's happening in this world. We may talk about like, the fears of AI or, things that are happening in politics or in like the political landscape of our country. But also it's going to be different. And I think another element that we're going to introduce to this, and we'll explain a little bit more later about why this is important, is I think we're also hoping to connect the Korean Adventist community as a whole. Right, we have this clear geographic divide between the West Coast people and the East Coast people, and then there's like Texas people who are kind of in there doing their own thing. But we want to connect the community, and so we'll also talk about what's going on in kind of the overall Korean American church.
Yeah, and I think we wanted something that kind of bridges the gap between all of our churches. I think the temptation is we kind of view our churches as these like islands that just kind of float. And on a week-to-week basis, that might be true. But really, we're all like interconnected. And we have a lot of common threads. We always play that game at a church, like, oh, do you know so-and-so? You only need to get to like 2 names before you find a common link. And so there's a lot of commonality between our churches, but the perception, I think, is like we're further apart than we really are, especially, like you said, when we talk about like the coastal and things. And so that was kind of the second main reason we want to do this podcast, was to act as kind of a bridge between different churches to bring to attention kind of the things that are happening in the Korean American community. Camp meetings, obviously a huge one, KIAMs, and kind of regional events that happen. We wanted to highlight those things.
I think another important reason why something like this is needed is because, growing up on the West Coast, like, I didn't know anything about the East Coast. Right. And to be honest, the only things that I knew about the East Coast were like not good things. And I'm sure that's true for East Coast people. Like, you don't know much about what's going on the West Coast, but there are some things that are circulating, and like they're usually not good.
Right.
And that's really harmful, I think, for our church community. And so I think if we can talk about, what we're doing and what's happening, we can unify us so that like it's not like, oh, those East Coast people, and those East Coast people are not like, oh, those West Coast people. Like you said, I think we have a lot more in common. I think we're all working to build the kingdom of God. And so by talking about what's going on, trying to unify the group so we can, build a more cohesive community within the Korean-American church.
I think so. And, I grew up in the East Coast. I was born and raised in Maryland. Chris was born and raised in Los Angeles. And so I think we're able to bring kind of those two perspectives. And like something that you mentioned, there's like a lot of connection. I was heavily involved with East Coast camp meeting for a long time. And I remember in the beginning, we hear about West Coast camp meeting. It was bigger. The perception we got was you had like an unlimited budget. The budget in the East Coast back then was like super small. I remember like junior department budget was like $500. High school was like $1,000.
That's crazy. That is crazy.
It is crazy. It is actually crazy. But we kept hearing that in the West Coast, they had VBS at camp meeting. In the East Coast, we kind of broke it to the traditional like cradle roll, primary, junior, early teen, high school. And I just remember thinking like, oh, like VBS sounds amazing at camp meeting. Like, why don't we do VBS on the East Coast too? And I remember that year, I pitched it to the admin team, and we basically combined cradle roll, primary, and half of juniors, and we created VBS for the first time.
That's awesome.
And as far as I know, they're still running a VBS program. So that's something that we borrowed from the West Coast. We heard about it. I didn't talk to anyone. I didn't know anyone in the West Coast to talk to. I was like, VBS, okay. And I just blindly brought it over. And so one of those things where we took an idea that was on the West, implemented on the East, and I think that really helped camp meeting. There's a lot of other programs, but
yeah, I mean that's great, and I think that's also so important. Like, we have a lot to learn from each other. I mean, there are things that we hear about in the East Coast that are great, and there are things that you hear about the West Coast. And so, on the flip side, for the West Coast was impacted greatly by East Coast camp meeting as well. So in the history of the West Coast camp meeting, it was like the running of camp meeting was based on the church rotation.
Right.
So, this church runs it, and so the EM of that church runs it. And so we were doing that, and every year, like, different groups were running it, and that was fine. But we all kind of came to a point where, like, we realized we have no continuity in terms of what we're trying to do. Everything is being remade. We're reinventing the wheel every single year. So much energy and resources going to that. And we had heard that the East Coast camp meeting is run differently because of the nature of the churches and like not having that many EM groups to be able to run the EM program. So what you guys did was create an admin team that would continue on in leading. And so actually, as of a few years ago, the West Coast group, we started an admin team, and we're functioning in that way as well. So that's like quite a significant adjustment we made, inspired by the East Coast.
Sure, right.
There's like that's awesome.
Collaboration, right? Unintended.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, a representative came and shared. It was just what we heard. And fortunately, in this situation, we heard good things and were able to integrate it. But I remember, like, when I was really young, like, pre-social media, it's not like I could just jump on Facebook or Instagram. In the East Coast, we'd hear stories about West Coast church and what West Coast was like. And we would never know unless you actually flew to the West Coast. And so for me, like, my source of information about West Coast, Korean church culture was through the English Compass. Like, back then, there was like the Korean Compass, and then the English Compass would have like 2 pages in the middle. Remember that? And it would always be this like weird, like, print on like pink paper or like yellow paper.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but I would always look forward to reading it because I'd want to know what's happening on the West Coast. I don't know if people on the West care about the East in that way.
I don't remember ever reading it. That's my bad, though. I am just like a dumb guy.
No, but I mean, I'm sure there are people like that. And I mean, the English Compass still exists today. And I think it provides a really good source of, opinion, and people write articles. But again, we wanted to kind of bridge the gap. We're going to use that phrase really often in this podcast, is bridge the gap between our local churches.
So we didn't plan this, but I had a question. Like, Jason, in your mind, like, who is this for? Who do you think, like, for those listening, like, what kind of people I think would be benefited by our podcast.
Yeah, I think it's anyone that's in the Korean-American Adventist community.
Yeah.
What that means, I mean, that's a very broadly defined thing. If you go to a Korean church, I think you're part of the community, whether you yourself are Korean or not. We'll be talking about issues that kind of affect Korean-American churches. The first couple episodes we're going to do is kind of about the state of the Korean church, which I think is really important for us to understand where we are before we talk about the future and what's going to happen. It's for anyone who, goes to church, but you're not able to really sit through the worship service, but you kind of want a little bit of that spiritual feeding throughout the week. The nature of the podcast is awesome because you can listen to it in your car, when you're exercising, I guess while you're working, you can listen to wherever you want. And so we want it to be kind of easily accessible. Worship live streams, you kind of have to sit down and watch it on the computer.
Yeah.
They're kind of long. This is going to be a lot shorter. Or anyone who's just really curious about Korean-American Adventism and kind of what issues we go through.
Yeah, and I think that what's going to happen here that I'm really looking forward to is the exchange of ideas about stuff happening. Because as you said, our conversations are localized and contextualized. And most likely when we're at Potluck, most of the people are just like us.
Right.
And I'm hoping that as we talk about faith and culture and the intersection, we're going to be able to bring up new thoughts and ideas that will stimulate more conversation. Because I feel like the more ideas, the more perspectives, the better it's going to be for us in our understanding of what's going on in this world.
Yeah, I think we'll continue the conversation that happened at our church potlucks. And we also maybe want to introduce new conversations that we feel like maybe our churches kind of need to have these conversations too. So it'll work kind of both ways in that regard.
Yeah, so I don't know if you feel this way, but I would love for feedback from people listening to send us hey, that was a terrible episode. What are you guys doing? You guys are super weird. Or that was a great episode. Or I would love to see this. I think it'd be cool to eventually have people from our churches on the podcast.
That's something we really want to do is kind of highlight people who either they're trying something really new at their church or, just highlight people in our community that we feel like would be a benefit for everyone to kind of learn and get to know. The feedback is really important. We're going to try to set up a website so you can kind of access everything in one place, plus leave feedback. YouTube obviously has a comment section.
And to be honest, mostly anyone listening to this knows us personally right now.
That is also true.
They could probably just text us or call us or come to our house and
come
talk
to our
to
house
us about it.
Grab us at church.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of the plan. And again, the nature of this show is going to change over time. Neither of us have really done podcasts before, so we're going to get better, I promise. It's not going to be as stiff and awkward. We'll get into our rhythm. But we wanted the nature of the show to be flexible. We didn't want it to be just this or just interviews or just something else. We wanted to be able to kind of reflect, again, the conversations that take place and be fluid in our podcast.
Yeah, so just to recap, the goal of this is to have a conversation about faith and culture for Korean-American Adventists and connect the Korean Adventist community or Korean-American Adventist community.
Yes.
So we're here at Andrews and we thought it would be interesting and fun. We have to be honest, Jason and I are not the biggest fans of this place. And I'm worried we're going to offend some people in this next little segment because, it's here. But, Jason and I were talking that, it'd be cool to share some of our stories of what it was like here. In connecting the community, if you're in the West Coast and you've never been to Andrews,
right.
You don't have to. And,
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of the background, we both came to study at the seminary. This was 2010.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Chris was already planning to go to seminary. You were at Glendale, right? Mm-hmm. Were you youth pastor?
I was a youth pastor at Glendale.
Yeah, I had just graduated undergrad. Chris is much older than I am, so we have a gap in education. He convinced me to come to Andrews. You remember that story?
I actually don't, but sounds like something I would do.
So we have a thing called MPAC. Our next episode, we kind of talk about what MPAC is. And so every year there's an MPAC meeting where all the EM pastors come together. And this one year, it happened to be in Maryland, where I'm from. And one of the nights, the pastors wanted to play basketball at Spencerville Church, where I was from. And back then, I was the guy with the gym keys. And so they called me and I was like, yeah, I'll come. And I was playing basketball. And I had known Chris. We met like at a wedding, actually.
Yeah.
Just kind of hung out there. And he was asking me like what I was going to do. And I'm like, I'm interested in pastoral ministry. And you're like, hey, I'm starting a seminary in the fall. Dude, you should totally come.
This rings a bell, yeah.
I was like, yeah, I should. And just like that, I moved my entire life from Maryland to Michigan, Berrien Springs. I graduated in May, and I moved in June.
That's crazy.
And then you abandoned me 2 years later.
This sounds very much like a Abraham moment. And I think the lesson is like, you shouldn't just listen to people that you don't know very well. Okay, but we had a great time here.
Yes.
We had fun. I know you had some issues with the school, and like Jason ended up having to live here. This is crazy. He had to, because of registration issues, you had to live here for like a year, not being a student.
So that's a really frustrating story. We're getting kind of into the weeds of like the background of seminary that no one cares about. But Chris, you studied theology in college. I studied history, so I didn't have a theology degree. So I was on a different track. I had to take extra classes, and it technically starts in the beginning of summer in May, which I couldn't do because I was graduating undergrad. And so because I couldn't start in May, they made me wait till the next May. But then something happened and I couldn't start. So they're like, okay, fine, just start in September. I was like, wait, you couldn't have said that a year ago. Anyway, so I had sat around in my apartment, not doing much of anything for the first year.
That's your fault. That's not my fault.
It's actually Andrew's fault, but
sure.
No one's counting.
But yeah, so we had a great time. We had great experiences here. And so like one of the things about I think the craziest story about Jason that I remember is, and I remember we're like still new to our friendship here, but he was living in an apartment, and I don't know if I saw it or he told me about it, but he was like the single. How old were you at this time?
I was like 23.
Okay, so we remember ourselves at 23, like we don't know anything, like we're barely adults, and he told me that so he was living with this other dude, and in his bathroom, next to the toilet, and this bathroom had tile floor.
Yeah, like ceramic tile floor.
A mushroom was growing out of the tile.
So to be clear, my roommate was living there first, and I just moved in with him. And like, he's like showing me around. He's like, dude, I gotta show you my mushroom. I'm like, okay. I thought he'd take me to like the kitchen, take me to the bathroom. And he's like, that's my mushroom. it's one single mushroom just growing through the cracks of the tile.
Crazy.
And it kind of became our pet. It's like our pet mushroom.
That is nasty, dude.
I mean, it's like two single guys living together. Awesome. It was like it was a pretty gross apartment. And then I remember my roommate's girlfriend was visiting from Southern. So he's like, dude, we got to clean the apartment. It's like, why do I have to clean the apartment for your girlfriend? Mm-hmm. But I'm a nice guy. I helped him. And he's like, you gotta get rid of the mushroom. Like, she can't see this mushroom. And I remember we gathered in the bathroom and we had basically like a funeral for this mushroom.
Oh my goodness.
It was really sad, actually.
You are ridiculous.
And we had like a moment of silence, and then he like sprayed it and then pulled it. And I still remember it. I still remember losing that mushroom.
That was a tragedy.
It was a tragedy. It is pretty gross in hindsight. I tell my wife, and she's just disgusted and horrified.
But it's an awesome story.
It is an awesome story. I still remember that mushroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Berrien Springs, there's not a ton to do. And the other thing too, I think with living in Berrien Springs is when you're an undergrad, you're on campus, and you just see all your friends like all the time. When you're in seminary, you're in the apartments.
Yeah.
And it's only like 5 minutes away from campus, but it feels a lot further and you feel more isolated.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know, in Andrews, from like October to like May, it snows and it's gray. Like there's nothing to do. I remember one time Chris and I don't know why we felt like we had to eat Subway, but we wanted to eat Subway, and there was a blizzard, like straight up, like
Yeah.
there was, it's got to be at least like 4 or 5 feet of snow on the ground, still snowing. And we're like, all right, let's ride the Subway. So we got in our car, drove to Subway. We like walk into the Subway, and the workers are staring at us like, "What are you doing?"
They were concerned for our safety.
They were. And the lady's like, "What are you doing here?" And they're like, "We want a sandwich." We're just like eating Subway by ourselves, this empty Subway.
There's something about this place that does this to you, I feel like, where it's just the complete lack
Yes.
of everything. Just you have nothing, and so you will go to great lengths to get something.
Something.
My wife had a really rough time
Yeah, I
here.
imagine.
She jokes, but I don't think she's joking, that if I told her and she knew, she would have waited a whole year to marry me. She would have
Yeah.
married me after.
Yeah.
Like I would, so imagine for her, like she has nothing to do. She's not a student.
Right.
She wasn't working. And so she was just in our apartment, and I have class at least. And more than a couple times I'd come home, and then the sun goes down really early, in the fall and the winter. And I would come home and open the door of the apartment, and she's sitting at the table. All the lights are off except for the one light above the dining table, and she's just sitting there doing nothing. Like she's not on her phone. She's just like staring like at the table. And I open the door, and it looks super scary.
Right.
And then she like turns to me and looks at me. She's like, "Welcome home." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, she might murder me today,"
Yeah, we call that a bait and switch, I believe.
Yes, I feel bad about it. It's crazy. It's a very different place here.
I always ask my wife, like, same thing. Like, if I had done what you did, bait and switch, and like, surprise, we're moving to Bay Area, like, how would you feel? And she tells me she thinks she would have been okay. She's a homebody. She likes staying at home. And I'm always like, I don't think you understand quite what it's like.
That being said, we were talking about this morning that I do think it's valuable that for me personally to be able to see this part of our country and this is how a large majority of our American citizens live, like in places like this. So number one, just opening my mind to this is what the world is for many people, but also leading me to appreciate more. Because I remember after going to Andrews, I visited Loma Linda.
Right.
And like living in LA, like you don't go to Loma Linda, like you don't even consider that LA, like it's Inland Empire, it's a different place, you don't go, there's nothing there. After Andrews, I visited Loma Linda and I was like, wow, Loma Linda is amazing. It has everything you need, this is wonderful. So.
Yeah, I think I went from Andrews, I lived in Loma for a month, and I was like, this place is like the best place in the world. Like, Starbucks is like 2 minutes away. I don't have to drive 40 minutes for my Starbucks.
Target is 10 minutes.
Target's right here. That wore off pretty quick, actually. But a lot of memories here at Andrews. Good memories, bad memories. But
but in a lot of ways, it's shaped,
of course,
our thinking and thoughts, and I guess the thing that I'm most grateful for is it shaped our friendship.
Yes, it did. We became extremely close
because we had nothing else.
Yeah, I believe
all we had was each other. Unfortunately and fortunately, so we built a great friendship there, and a couple other people had great friends, and still friends today. So I'm thankful.
I don't think I made any friends at seminary.
That's really sad.
Yeah. I was not in a good place while I was here. But it did form a friendship. I believe the clinical term is trauma sharing?
Trauma bonding?
Trauma bonding, yes.
Bonding.
Anyway, so this is our first episode. We hope that you keep listening. We're going to be putting kind of short clips on our social medias as well. You can get this podcast anywhere you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Google, YouTube. And so as we start this journey, we invite you to join us. We're going to have some awesome conversations, talk about really important things, and we hope that we can kind of bridge our community and bring us closer together as we do this mission as a joint church family.